The snow didn't just fall that winter, it came to bury secrets. And in a town full of whispers, the quietest man held the darkest one. Boone Carver was a ghost who walked in daylight. He moved through the drifts like he was part of the storm, a man made of mountain rock and frozen rage. His beard was a tangle of ice, his coat a road map of old battles. They said he'd fought a grizzly with nothing but his hands and a knife. They said he didn't talk because his voice could curdle milk. When he walked into town, women pulled their children inside and bolted the doors. The snow, though, it didn't seem to mind him. It settled on his broad shoulders like it was coming home. On the other side of that same forgotten town, in a cabin that leaned away from the wind, Hannah Mae Caldwell was trying to coax life into a dying fire. The stew in her pot was thin, mostly broth and prayer. A few carrots, a handful of potatoes, and a whisper of rabbit she'd traded her last good quilt for. She tasted it. It would have to do. Hannah knew what the town thought of her. She wasn't a beauty. She wasn't blessed with the easy laughter that made men turn their heads. Her own reflection in a piece of broken glass had told her the truth years ago. I ain't pretty. A brand she'd worn ever since. The town made sure she never forgot it. Martha Jo Pritchard, who ran the inn with a sour face and a sharp tongue, loved to twist the knife. "Poor Hannah Mae," she'd say, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Got a face like a dried-up riverbed, but Lord, the girl can make a rabbit last a week." Jonas Pike and his crew of ranch hands would laugh, their teeth glinting. Hannah learned to make herself small, to live in the corners. But shame wasn't something you could hide from. It was a cold rock in your gut, and it only got heavier with time. But this story isn't just about a quiet man and a plain woman. It's about the secrets they were willing to die for. And it all started the day Boone Carver came back from the mountains. He walked past the saloon, the lanterns swinging in the wind, and the sheriff just watched him go, not saying a word. Boone's silence was louder than a gunshot. He was headed for the trading post, a fresh deer hide slung over his shoulder. The air inside turned thick and heavy the second he stepped through the door. But it wasn't Boone the town was whispering about that day. It was Hannah. She was there, her pot of stew steaming on the counter, trying to trade it for a bag of flour. She kept her eyes down, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle. Then Jonas Pike's voice cut through the room. "Well, look what we got here. The stew girl. Bet she's hoping to catch that mountain ghost with her rabbit water." The laughter was ugly and loud. Hannah squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could disappear. The pot was her only shield, and that's when a shadow fell over her. Boone Carver stood beside her, so close she could feel the cold coming off his coat. He was a mountain, solid and silent. The storekeeper fumbled with his scales, his eyes darting between the giant and the girl. The laughter died in Jonas's throat. Nobody expected Boone to do anything. He never did. But he looked down at the pot of stew. Then he looked at Hannah. And for just a second, the look in his dark eyes silenced the entire room. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else entirely. Recognition. With a hand that was trembling so hard she could barely hold it, Hannah ladled some stew into a bowl. "It ain't much," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But it's warm." The men in the store were grinning, waiting for him to sneer, to push it away. A man like Boone Carver didn't eat scraps from a plain girl's pot, but he did. He took the bowl in his scarred hands, hands that had supposedly killed a grizzly bear. He lifted it to his lips and drank it down, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. The only sound was the hiss of the fire. The grins faded from every face in that room. When he was done, he placed the empty bowl on the counter. The click of the ceramic on the wood sounded like a gavel. It sounded like a promise. He didn't say thank you, he didn't say anything. He just held her gaze for one long, thunderous heartbeat, then turned and walked out, leaving the deer hide on the counter. The storekeeper stared at the hide, then at Hannah. It was worth 20 bags of flour. Hannah May Caldwell stood frozen, the warmth of Boone's gaze still on her skin. For the first time in her life, it felt like someone had truly seen her. But she was wrong. He hadn't just seen her. He had recognized a secret she thought she had buried forever. The town's gossip didn't just get meaner, it got venomous. Martha Jo told everyone who would listen that Hannah was a desperate fool, trying to trap a wild animal with thin stew. As if a hot meal could make a man forget she's plain as a mud fence, she cackled. The sheriff, a weary man named Amos, pulled her aside one morning. "Best you keep your distance from him, girl," he warned, his voice low. "Folks around here are scared of Boone, and fear makes people dangerous." She just nodded, the cold rock of shame settling back in her gut. But at night, alone in her cabin, she didn't think about the whispers. She thought about the way he'd held that bowl, the way he'd finished every last drop. It was more than just a meal. It was a message. But what was he trying to say? The answer came during the next blizzard, a monster storm that buried the world in white. Her woodpile was nearly gone. Shivering, her teeth chattering, Hannah was trying to drag a fallen branch toward her cabin when a figure emerged from the swirling snow. It was Boone. He didn't speak. He simply took the small axe from her frozen fingers. His hands swallowed it whole, and then he began to work. The axe rose and fell, splitting logs with a terrifying, beautiful precision. He stacked the wood neatly by her door, a fortress against the storm. When he was done, he turned to leave, a ghost ready to be swallowed by the blizzard again. And Hannah found her voice. "I ain't pretty," she whispered, the words torn away by the wind. "But I can keep the fire." He stopped. For just a moment he paused, his back to her. She couldn't be sure if he'd heard her. Then he trudged off into the white, gone as quickly as he had appeared. But something had changed. He wasn't just helping her anymore. He was watching her. Days later, she woke to find her leaky roof had been patched. A week after that, a bundle of snares appeared on her doorstep. He'd leave a rabbit or a brace of squirrels, but never when she was looking. It was a silent conversation, a language of survival and secrets. She would leave a bowl of stew on her hearth at night, and in the morning, the bowl would be empty. She started to notice things. The way the wood was stacked wasn't random. It was a specific pattern, one she hadn't seen since she was a little girl, back in another life. The knots he used on the snares were unique, a sailor's hitch you wouldn't find on the prairie. These weren't the actions of a simple mountain man. This was a man speaking in code. And Hannah was starting to understand. The town, however, saw something different. They saw a beast being tamed by a desperate woman. Jonas Pike saw a challenge. He cornered her outside the trading post one afternoon, his breath stinking of whiskey. "Looks like Boone's got himself a little pet," he sneered. "Stew in silence, a perfect match for a perfect boar." His friends laughed. Hannah tried to walk past, her cheeks burning, but Jonas grabbed her arm. "Tell me, what's it like having a monster for a watchdog?" The shame was a hot poker in her throat. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, and then the room went cold. Boone was there, standing right behind her. He hadn't made a sound. He just appeared, his presence sucking all the air out of the store. The laughter stopped. The grins froze. Boone didn't look at Jonas. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a silent mountain of a man, and his nearness was all the protection she needed. For the first time in her life, Hannah didn't lower her eyes. She lifted her chin, and the shame took a step back. Jonas let go of her arm like it was on fire. Later that night, Sheriff Amos found her by the town well. "That man," he said, nodding toward the mountains. "He ain't a storm, girl. He's the thing storms run from. You be careful." She knew he was right. Storms were already all around her. That night, a knock came at her door. It was soft, almost hesitant. It was Boone. The blizzard was raging behind him, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes besides silence. It looked like a question. He stepped inside, and the tiny cabin seemed to shrink. He sat at her small table, the chair groaning under his weight, and ate the stew she gave him. The firelight played across the scars on his face, making them look like ancient maps. When he was done, he pushed the bowl away, and finally spoke. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep underground. "You use hyssop in your stew." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Hannah's blood ran cold. Hyssop. A rare herb, one her mother had always used. An herb from the gardens of their estate, a lifetime ago. An herb no one in this dusty, forgotten town would have ever heard of. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "It's just an old family recipe," she whispered, her voice tight. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers. "The Montgomery family, I'd wager." The name hit her like a physical blow. Montgomery, her real name, the name she had run from, the name she thought she had buried under miles of prairie dust and a plain, forgettable face. The stew pot slipped from her trembling hands and crashed to the floor, the sound as loud as a scream in the sudden, terrible silence. The secret was out, and the real storm was about to begin. Hannah's world tilted on its axis. She stared at the giant of a man sitting at her table, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. He wasn't just a mountain man. He was a messenger from a past she had nearly killed herself to escape. "Who are you?" she breathed, backing away until she felt the cold wall of the cabin against her spine. He didn't answer right away. He just watched her, his gaze steady, missing nothing. "I'm a man who recognizes a ghost when he sees one," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Same as you." The air crackled with unspoken history. He knew. He knew she was Annalise Montgomery, the daughter of a wealthy shipping magnate from the East, a man ruined by a rival so cruel and powerful he'd had to send his only child into hiding with a new name and a backstory of poverty. Hannah Mae Caldwell, the plain stew girl, was a carefully constructed fiction. A role she had played for 5 years, hoping the monster from her past would never find her. "How?" she whispered. "The hyssop was a guess," Boone admitted. "But the way you carry yourself, even when you're trying to look small, you can't hide quality. And your eyes. They're not the eyes of a woman who's known nothing but hardship. They're the eyes of a woman who's known palaces, and then seen them burn." She felt stripped bare. The careful layers of her disguise peeled away. The shame she'd felt from the town's taunts was nothing compared to this. This was the terror of being found. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking. "For now," he said, rising from the chair, his shadow swallowing the room. "I want you to be careful. The man who hunts you has a long reach, and his hounds are everywhere." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Jonas Pike," he said, not looking back. "He watches you too close. He's not just a bully." And then he was gone, melting back into the storm, leaving Hannah alone with the wreckage of her broken pot and her shattered illusion of safety. Boone's words echoed in her mind. Jonas Pike is not just a bully. She started to see it, replaying every sneer, every taunt. He hadn't just been cruel, he'd been probing. His questions about her past, his jabs about fancy folk, they weren't random insults, they were tests. He suspected who she was. Or worse, he already knew. The town suddenly felt like a cage, and every person in it a potential enemy. Was Martha Joe's cruelty just gossip, or was she reporting back to someone? Was the sheriff's warning a kindness, or a threat? Her little cabin, once a haven, now felt like a trap. The silent alliance with Boone shifted. His deliveries of wood and game were no longer just acts of kindness. They were strategic moves on a chessboard she was just beginning to understand. He was fortifying her position, keeping her alive. But why? What was his stake in this? Who was Boone Carver, really? The answer to one of her questions came a few days later. Jonas Pike and his friends cornered her again, this time behind the livery stable, far from the eyes of the town. There was no taunting this time, no sneering grin. His face was cold, his eyes hard. "The game is up, Annalise," he hissed, his hand clamping around her arm like a manacle. Her real name, spoken in his venomous voice, was a death sentence. "Mr. Sterling sends his regards. He's very eager to see you again." Sterling, the name of the man who had destroyed her father, the monster from her nightmares. The blood drained from her face. They had found her. "Heard you've got a pet monster watching over you," Jonas continued, twisting her arm. "He ain't here now. You're coming with us. There's a handsome reward for your return." His friends laughed, closing in. Hannah's mind raced. She thought of Boone, of his quiet strength. He had shown her that she was more than just the town's plain victim. He had seen the queen hiding behind the pauper's rags. And in that moment, a flicker of defiance ignited in her chest. "You'll have to kill me first," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Jonas laughed. "That can be arranged." He raised his fist, and Hannah braced for the blow. But it never landed. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the stable. Boone moved with a speed that was impossible for a man his size. He wasn't a brawler. He was a predator. One of Jonas's men went down with a sickening crunch before he even saw what hit him. The second one tried to draw his pistol, but Boone's hand shot out, catching his wrist and shattering it with a single brutal twist. The man screamed. Jonas shoved Hannah away and stumbled back, his face a mask of shock and terror. He stared at the mountain man, who stood between him and Hannah, a silent, deadly guardian. Who in the hell are you?" Jonas stammered. Boone reached inside his tattered coat. He didn't pull out a knife or a gun. He pulled out a small, polished silver badge. It glinted in the pale winter light. "Carver," he said, his voice as cold and final as a tombstone. "Pinkerton Detective Agency, and Mr. Sterling is my bounty." Jonas Pike's face went white. He wasn't looking at a mountain man. He was looking at the most feared lawman in the territories. A man who was famous for one thing. He never, ever lost a bounty. The board had been set. The pieces were in motion. And Hannah May Caldwell, the plain girl who made stew, was standing at the very center of a war she never knew was being fought for her. Jonas Pike didn't run. He was too terrified to move. He just stared at the badge in Boone's hand, his mind struggling to connect the fearsome, silent mountain man with the legendary Pinkerton agent known only as Carver. A man who was said to be more ghost than human. A relentless tracker who had brought down entire outlaw gangs single-handedly. You're supposed to be dead," Jonas stammered, taking a step back. "Reports were exaggerated," Boone said, his voice flat. He took a step forward, his shadow engulfing the smaller man. "Sterling sent you to find her. That makes you an accessory. You have two choices. You can tell me everything you know about his operation, where he is, who his men are, what his plans are. Or you can hang." Fear warred with self-preservation on Jonas's face. His loyalty to Sterling was bought with coin, but his fear of Carver was primal. The two ranch hands Boone had dispatched were groaning on the ground, one clutching a broken arm, the other unconscious. Suddenly, the sound of a shotgun racking echoed through the alley. Sheriff Amos stepped out from behind the stable, his old shotgun leveled squarely at Jonas's chest. "I'd take the deal if I were you, son," the sheriff said, his weary eyes missing nothing. "This man's got a knack for keeping his promises." Hannah stared at the sheriff, then back at Boone. They were in this together. The sheriff's warnings, his tired glances, it wasn't disapproval. He was protecting Boone. He knew who he was all along. The entire town, she realized, was a stage, and she had been the only one who didn't know her part. Defeated, Jonas sagged. "Sterling's coming," he croaked. "He got word a month ago that a woman matching Annalise's description was seen in this territory. He's not coming himself. He sent his top man, a killer named Silas. They're supposed to meet me in 3 days at the old abandoned silver mine north of here. They're planning to grab her and take the whole town's payroll from the stagecoach on the way out." Boone's eyes narrowed. It was worse than he thought. Sterling wasn't just tying up a loose end. He was funding his empire with robbery and using Hannah as the key to his plan. "You'll keep that meeting," Boone commanded. "You'll act as if nothing has changed. We'll be waiting." Sheriff Amos hauled a whimpering Jonas to his feet and dragged him and his men toward the jail. Boone turned to Hannah. The silence between them was different now, charged not with mystery, but with shared purpose. "My real name is Thomas Carver," he said, the first piece of his own past he had ever offered her. "I was the agent assigned to your father's case 5 years ago. I was supposed to be protecting him the night Sterling's men came. I failed. Your father was killed. I was left for dead." The story came out in short, clipped sentences. He had survived, but the agency thought he was dead. He went underground, abandoning his name and his life, and had spent the last 5 years hunting Sterling outside the law, a ghost seeking vengeance. He had tracked one of Sterling's lieutenants to this territory and had been watching, waiting for a chance to get closer to the man who had taken everything from him. "I never expected to find you," he said, his gaze softening for the first time. "When you walked into that trading post, I knew the risks of getting involved. But when I tasted that stew, it tasted like a second chance." The weight of his confession settled over her. He wasn't just a protector. He was a man seeking redemption. Her survival was tied to his vengeance. She looked at this giant, scarred man, this legendary lawman who had hidden himself in plain sight, and she saw not a monster, but a man as broken and haunted as she was. "You make more than stew, Hannah May," he had told her once. Now she understood. She didn't just make him feel welcome. She made him feel like the man he used to be, the man he still could be. "They call him a monster," she thought, her heart aching with a fierce protective surge of emotion. "But the real monsters are the ones who wear fine suits and hide in plain sight." "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a burning resolve. She was done hiding. She was done being Hannah May Caldwell, the plain victim. She was Annalise Montgomery, and she was going to help this man burn her father's killer to the ground. "Now," Boone said, a grim light in his eyes, "we set a trap, and we end this." The next 3 days were a blur of tension and preparation. The town went on as usual, but now Hannah saw it through new eyes. The whispers and stares felt different, not just cruel but ignorant. These people had no idea that a war was about to be fought on their doorstep, that the plain girl they mocked was a fugitive heiress, and the silent mountain man they feared was a legendary agent of justice. Boone and Sheriff Amos worked in quiet, efficient concert. They deputized a few trusted men from the outlying ranches, men who knew how to handle a rifle and keep their mouths shut. They planned their ambush at the old silver mine, using Boone's intimate knowledge of the surrounding mountains to their advantage. Hannah's role was the most dangerous. She had to be the bait. The plan was for her to ride out toward the mine on the morning of the rendezvous, pretending to be gathering firewood. Jonas, under the watchful eye of the sheriff, would signal Silas and his men, telling them the girl was alone and vulnerable. The night before, Boone came to her cabin. The air was thick with everything they hadn't said. He wasn't the silent, brooding figure anymore. He was Thomas Carver, a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low. "We can find another way." Yes, I do, she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. For 5 years, I've been hiding. I've let them take my name, my life. I let this town tell me I was worthless because I was plain. I'm not that person anymore. You showed me that. This is my fight, too. He reached out, his rough, calloused hand gently touching her cheek. It was the first time he had ever touched her. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth and connection that spoke more than words ever could. Annalise, he said, her real name sounding like a prayer on his lips. When this is over... He trailed off, the promise hanging in the air between them. I know, she whispered. The morning dawned cold and gray. Hannah rode out on a small mare, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked small and alone against the vast, snowy landscape. But she wasn't alone. Boone was shadowing her from a high ridge, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. The sheriff and his deputies were hidden in the rocks around the mine entrance. She saw them first. 3 riders, emerging from the trees near the mine. One of them, a man with a long, pale scar down his face, spurred his horse forward. Silas. He rode with the swagger of a man who had never known fear. Jonas Pike stood near the mine entrance, waving them in. Silas rode up to him, his eyes scanning the area, cold and sharp as a hawk's. Where is she? Silas demanded. Jonas pointed a trembling finger toward Hannah. There! Just like I promised. Silas grinned, a cruel, thin slash across his face. Perfect! Mr. Sterling will be pleased. Grab her. And once the stagecoach comes through, we take the payroll and burn this whole worthless town to the ground. His men started toward her. This was it. The moment the trap would be sprung. Hannah held her breath, her hand tightening on the reins. Suddenly a 4th rider appeared, coming fast from the west. He wasn't one of Silas's men. He was dressed in a fine city coat, his face pinched and cruel. Hannah's blood turned to ice. It was him. It was Sterling. He hadn't sent his man. He had come himself. The trap had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more deadly. Sterling reined in his horse beside Silas, his cold eyes fixing on Hannah. A smug, proprietary smile spread across his face. Annalise Montgomery, he called out, his voice smooth and cultured, yet dripping with venom. It has been a long time. Did you really think you could hide from me in a place like this? From his position on the ridge, Boone felt a surge of pure, cold rage. The man he had hunted for 5 years was right there, in his sights. But he couldn't take the shot. Not with Hannah so close. Sterling had changed the game. I should have known you were too much of a coward to stay away, Hannah called back, her voice ringing with a courage she didn't know she possessed. Sterling laughed. Courage, a fine trait. Your father had it too. Look where it got him. He turned to Silas. The plan has changed. Forget the payroll. I want her. And I want the man they call Boone. I've heard whispers he's been seen in these hills. I have a score to settle with a ghost from my past. Find him and kill him. Kill them all. Before Sheriff Amos could give the signal to open fire, Silas acted. He was faster than anyone could have anticipated. He spurred his horse directly at Hannah, leaning out of the saddle to grab her. Simultaneously, Sterling and his other man drew their pistols and began firing into the rocks where the deputies were hidden. The ambush had been turned on its head. Hannah screamed as Silas's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her from her horse. He was strong, his grip like iron. He was dragging her toward Sterling. From the ridge, Boone fired. The shot was perfect. It hit Silas's man in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. But now their position was revealed. Sterling's men returned fire, bullets kicking up snow and stone all around Boone. Down below, Sheriff Amos and his men were pinned down. They were out in the open, caught completely by surprise. Silas, holding Hannah as a human shield, dragged her toward Sterling's horse. It's over, lawman, he bellowed. You want the girl to live, you drop your guns. Boone's heart pounded. He was trapped. If he shot, he could hit Hannah. If he didn't, Sterling would take her, and he would lose her forever. He would fail all over again. He saw the look in Hannah's eyes. It wasn't fear, it was determination. She locked her gaze on his, and with a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, she gave him a silent command. Don't let him win, no matter the cost. She understood. Her life was secondary to justice, to stopping this monster. And then she did something no one expected. With a guttural cry, she drove her elbow back into Silas's ribs with all her might. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She threw her weight sideways, pulling both of them off balance and tumbling into the deep snow. It was the opening Boone needed. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The first caught Silas in the leg as he struggled to rise. The second was aimed at Sterling, but Sterling was already moving, diving behind his horse for cover. The fight exploded into chaos. The sheriff and his deputies laid down covering fire. Hannah scrambled away from the wounded Silas, taking cover behind a cluster of rocks. Boone left his rifle and began to move, descending from the ridge with the impossible speed of a mountain lion. He wasn't a sniper anymore. He was going down there to finish this, face to face. He drew the heavy Colt from his hip, his face a mask of cold fury. 5 years of hunting, 5 years of living like a ghost, had all led to this single moment. Sterling, seeing his men down and the legendary Carver descending upon him like an avalanche, knew he was beaten. He abandoned his horse and scrambled toward the entrance of the old silver mine. "It's not over, Carver," he screamed, his voice echoing from the darkness of the mine shaft. "You want me? Come and get me." Boone didn't hesitate. He charged into the darkness of the mine after him. Hannah watched him go, her heart in her throat. The final battle would be fought in the dark, a reckoning between 2 men, with the ghosts of the past as their only witnesses. Sheriff Amos and his men rounded up the wounded outlaws, securing the scene. But all eyes were on the black maw of the mine shaft. The echoes of gunshots had faded, replaced by an unnerving silence. Hannah crept closer, her hands clenched into fists, every nerve screaming. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a figure emerged from the darkness, walking slowly into the pale winter light. It was Boone. He was bruised, his coat was torn, and there was a long gash on his cheek. But he was walking, and he was alone. He walked straight to Hannah, his eyes finding hers. The cold, hard mask of the hunter was gone. In its place was a profound weariness, and something else. Peace. "It's over," he said, his voice raspy. "Sterling won't be hurting anyone ever again." Tears of relief streamed down Hannah's face. She didn't care about the deputies or the prisoners. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He was solid and real beneath her hands. He held her tight, his hand stroking her hair. For a long moment, they just stood there, 2 survivors clinging to each other in the aftermath of the storm. The town was never the same. When the truth came out, that the plain stew girl was a wealthy heiress and the terrifying mountain man was a hero, the gossip stopped. It was replaced by a quiet, sheepish respect. Martha Jo Pritchard couldn't look Hannah in the eye for a month. Jonas Pike was sent away to a federal prison, his treachery having earned him a long sentence. Annalise Montgomery had her name back, and with it, her fortune. But she found she didn't care about the money or the fine houses of her past. She had found something far more valuable in a leaning cabin at the edge of the world. She chose to stay. Thomas Carver, his bounty finally claimed, and his ghosts finally laid to rest, was offered his old life back, a place of honor with the Pinkerton Agency. He chose to stay, too. Spring finally came to the prairie, melting the snow and revealing the green, stubborn life that had been waiting underneath all along. On a warm afternoon, Thomas and Annalise stood on the porch of her small cabin, their cabin now, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He took her hand, his scarred, powerful fingers lacing through hers. "You know," he said, a rare smile touching his lips, "I've been thinking about your stew." She laughed, a real, easy laugh that she had once thought she'd never find again. "Oh? Is that so?" "Yes," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I think it could use a little more hyssop." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. The world had tried to tell her she was plain, that she was worthless. It had tried to tell him he was a monster, a ghost. But they had been wrong. Here, together, they were simply home. They had faced down the worst of men and the cruelest of winters, and had found in each other a quiet strength that was more powerful than any fortune and more resilient than any storm. Their story wasn't one of grand passion, but of something deeper, truer. It was a story of how two broken people, cast out by the world, could find in the quiet spaces between words a love that could heal them both. And they knew, as the first stars of evening began to appear in the vast open sky, that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance and that true strength is found in kindness, then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. Let us know in the comments what you think. Can love truly heal all wounds?